So this happened 3 months ago, and I still can't believe how everything went down. I thought I knew my fiancée Sarah completely after 4 years together, but boy was I wrong. The night of her bachelorette party changed everything I believed about our relationship and honestly about myself too. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that club, but my buddy Jake dragged me out for drinks, and we ended up at the same place by total coincidence. What I witnessed that night still makes my stomach turn. The worst part wasn't just what she did, but how her friends covered for her, and how she looked me straight in the eye afterward and lied about everything. I'm talking about betrayal on a level I didn't think was possible from someone you're planning to marry in 2 weeks. So I'm David, 29, fiancé. Well, I was a fiancé anyway. I work in accounting at a mid-sized firm downtown, and honestly thought I had my life pretty well figured out. Sarah and I had been together since college, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was supposed to happen in just 2 weeks when all this went down. I'm not the type of guy who gets suspicious easily. Sarah always said I was too trusting, which I guess turned out to be true. She worked in marketing at a different company, and we had our own friend groups, but got along great with each other's people. At least I thought we did. The whole bachelorette party thing was supposed to be this big weekend celebration. Sarah had been planning it for months with her maid of honor Jessica and her college friends. They rented a limo, booked dinner at some fancy restaurant, then planned to hit a few clubs afterward. Pretty standard stuff from what I understood. I wasn't worried about it at all. Sarah had never given me any reason not to trust her, and honestly the idea of her doing anything crazy seemed completely out of character. She was always the responsible one between us, the planner, the one who made sure we stayed on budget and kept our lives organized. My bachelor party was the weekend before hers, just a low-key night with the guys at a sports bar. Nothing wild, which was exactly how I wanted it. I figured her party would be similar, maybe with more dancing and cocktails, but basically harmless fun with her girlfriends before we got married. The night started innocently enough. My friend Jake had called me around 9 asking if I wanted to grab a beer since Sarah was out with her girls anyway. I figured why not, so we met up at this sports bar near downtown. We were just catching up, talking about work and the upcoming wedding, when Jake suggested we check out this new place he'd heard about. That new place turned out to be Platinum, which I should have realized was the same club Sarah's group had mentioned hitting later in the evening. But honestly, it didn't even cross my mind until we were already inside, and I heard this familiar laugh from across the room. I turned toward the sound, and there was Sarah with her whole crew, already pretty drunk from what I could tell. They had claimed this big corner booth, and there were empty bottles and glasses everywhere. Jessica was practically falling over laughing at something, and Sarah looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. At first I thought it was kind of funny that we'd ended up at the same place. I was about to go over and say hi when Jake grabbed my arm and told me to wait a second. He pointed toward their table, and I noticed there were these 2 guys with them that I didn't recognize. They looked like they were in their early 20s, really built, and dressed in these tight black shirts. One of Sarah's friends, Amanda, was talking to the bartender about something and pointing back toward their booth. The music was loud, but I could see money changing hands. That's when it clicked that these weren't just random guys they'd met. These were hired entertainment. I told Jake we should probably leave, that it felt weird watching Sarah's party without her knowing I was there. But he convinced me to stay for one more drink, said we could just hang out at the other end of the bar and mind our own business. The thing is, I couldn't stop glancing over at their table. Sarah was acting different than I'd ever seen her. She was being really touchy with her friends, laughing way too loud, and kept looking around the club like she was checking to see who was watching. When the music changed to something with a heavier beat, the 2 guys they'd hired started this routine. It was pretty tame stuff, honestly, just some basic dancing and shirt removal. Sarah's friends were cheering and throwing dollar bills, but Sarah herself seemed almost bored by it. She kept checking her phone and whispering something to Jessica. That's when I noticed some of the other people in the club starting to stare at their table. Not because of the strippers, but because Sarah and her friends were getting really loud and drawing attention. A group of women at a nearby table kept looking over and whispering to each other with these disapproving expressions. I was starting to feel uncomfortable about the whole situation when Amanda came back from the bar with the bartender following her. They were carrying what looked like a bottle of expensive champagne and some kind of tray. The bartender set everything down at their table and said something to Sarah that made her face light up with this smile I'd never seen before. That's when I realized whatever was about to happen, this wasn't just a standard bachelorette party anymore. The champagne seemed to be some kind of signal because suddenly the whole energy at their table shifted. Sarah stood up and started moving toward the dance floor, and her friends followed her like they were part of some coordinated plan. The two hired guys grabbed their shirts and came along too. I told Jake I wanted to get closer to see what was happening, but he said that was a bad idea. He reminded me that Sarah didn't know I was there, and it might cause drama if she spotted me. But I was getting this weird feeling in my gut that something wasn't right about the whole scene. From where we were standing at the bar, I could see Sarah and her group had taken over this section of the dance floor. The strippers were doing their thing, but what caught my attention was how Sarah's friends had formed this tight circle around her. Every time someone else tried to dance nearby, Jessica or Amanda would block them out. Sarah was in the middle of this circle, and I could tell she was really drunk now. She was moving in ways I'd never seen her move, being way more physical than she usually was even with me. One of the hired guys was dancing behind her, and she was pressing back against him in a way that made my stomach clench. I started walking toward the dance floor, but Jake caught up with me and pulled me back. He told me I needed to think about what I was doing, that if I confronted her now it would ruin everything. He said maybe she was just letting loose before the wedding, and I shouldn't read too much into it. But then I saw Amanda pull out her phone and start recording. She was filming Sarah dancing with this guy, and from the angle she was holding the phone, it was clear she was getting some pretty explicit footage. Sarah knew she was being filmed too because she looked right at the camera and did this thing with her tongue that I'd never seen her do. That's when Jessica noticed me. She was facing my direction when she spotted me at the edge of the dance floor, and her face went completely white. She immediately moved to block my view of Sarah and started waving at the other girls to get their attention. Within seconds, they had completely rearranged their formation. The hired guys suddenly backed off and started dancing with other people nearby. Sarah's friends closed ranks around her and started moving her toward the back of the club where there was this VIP area. I tried to follow them, but there was a bouncer at the entrance to the VIP section who told me it was private party only. I could see through the glass doors that they were all in there, but I couldn't make out what was happening. Jake convinced me to go back to the bar and wait to see if they came back out. He bought me another drink and kept telling me that I was probably overreacting, that it was just typical bachelorette party stuff. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen on that dance floor was way beyond normal. About 20 minutes later, Amanda came out of the VIP area alone. She went straight to the bathroom, and when she came back out, she was on her phone. I could tell she was texting someone because she kept looking around nervously while she typed. That's when my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted something on Instagram and tagged Sarah in it. When I opened the app, there was a video clip from earlier in the night. It was just a few seconds long, but it showed Sarah doing something with one of those hired guys that definitely wasn't just dancing. The person who posted it had already deleted it by the time I tried to watch it again, but I'd seen enough. My hands were shaking as I showed the screen to Jake, and even he admitted that what we'd witnessed was way over the line. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying what I'd seen at the club and trying to convince myself that maybe I'd misunderstood the situation. Sarah came home around 3 in the morning, completely wasted and barely able to walk straight. She mumbled something about having an amazing time and passed out fully clothed on top of our bed. The next morning she woke up with a massive hangover and claimed she couldn't remember most of the night. She said they'd had dinner, done some dancing, and that was about it. When I asked her about the VIP area, she looked at me with this confused expression and asked what I was talking about. I decided to test her a little bit. I mentioned that Jake and I had ended up at Platinum for a drink, and her whole body tensed up. She asked if I'd seen her there, and when I said yes, she immediately started explaining how they'd just stopped by for one quick drink before going somewhere else. But that wasn't what I'd witnessed at all. They'd been there for hours, and the amount of empty bottles at their table proved it. When I pointed this out, Sarah got defensive and accused me of spying on her bachelorette party. She said it was weird that I'd been at the same club and hadn't come over to say hi. The conversation was going nowhere, so I dropped it and went to make coffee. While I was in the kitchen, I heard Sarah's phone buzzing constantly with text messages. She was responding to them really quickly, like she was having some kind of urgent conversation with someone. When I came back with her coffee, she immediately put her phone face down and smiled at me like nothing had happened. She started talking about wedding details and asking if I'd confirmed something with the caterer. It felt like she was deliberately trying to change the subject. Later that afternoon, while Sarah was in the shower, her phone lit up with another message. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the notification showed it was from a group chat called and the preview text said something about deleting photos. I knew I shouldn't look, but something inside me couldn't resist. I picked up her phone and opened the message thread. What I found made my blood run cold. There were screenshots of text messages between Sarah's friends from the night before, and they were discussing how to handle the fact that I'd been at the club. Jessica had written that they needed to make sure their stories matched about what happened in the VIP area. Amanda had responded that she'd already deleted the videos from her phone, but was worried about other people who might have recorded things. One message from someone named Brittany, who I didn't even know had been there, said they should tell me that Sarah had felt sick and they'd taken her to the VIP area to lie down. Another friend suggested they should all say the hired guys had left early and nothing interesting had happened. The worst part was Sarah's responses in the chat. She'd written that she didn't think I'd seen anything important, but they should stick to the story about her feeling sick just in case. She also mentioned that she'd told me she couldn't remember most of the night, so they should all claim they'd been too drunk to remember details if I asked them about it. I took screenshots of the entire conversation before Sarah got out of the shower. My hands were shaking as I saved the images to my own phone and then put hers back exactly where I'd found it. When she came out of the bathroom, she was acting completely normal. She kissed me on the cheek and started talking about what we should have for lunch. But now I knew for certain that she was lying to me about what had happened, and her friends were all in on it. The question was what exactly they were covering up and how far this betrayal actually went. I spent the next few days trying to act normal while internally freaking out about what I discovered. Sarah seemed completely back to her usual self, talking about wedding plans and acting affectionate like nothing had happened. But every time her phone buzzed, I noticed she would check it immediately and sometimes step into another room to respond. On Wednesday, I decided to reach out to my friend Mike, who knew Jessica through his girlfriend. I asked him casually if he'd heard anything about how Sarah's bachelorette party had gone. Mike said his girlfriend had mentioned that Jessica seemed stressed about something related to the party, but she hadn't shared any details. That evening, Sarah's friend Amanda called while we were having dinner. Sarah answered and immediately went into our bedroom to take the call. I could hear her talking in hushed tones, but couldn't make out the words. When she came back, she said Amanda was having some drama with her boyfriend and needed to vent. But something about Sarah's demeanor told me that wasn't what the call had been about. She seemed nervous for the rest of the evening and kept checking her phone more frequently than usual. On Thursday, I got a text from Jake asking if I wanted to grab lunch. When we met up, he told me he'd been thinking about what we'd witnessed at the club and felt like I deserved to know the truth about what had really happened. He said he had a friend who worked security at Platinum and might be able to find out more information. I told Jake about the group chat screenshots I'd found, and his expression got really serious. He said it sounded like Sarah and her friends were definitely hiding something significant, and the fact that they'd coordinated their lies meant it was probably worse than I'd initially thought. That afternoon, Jake texted me that his security friend had some information. We met up after work at a coffee shop near my office. Jake's friend, who asked me not to use his name, told me that the VIP area at Platinum had security cameras, and that Sarah's group had definitely been in there for over an hour. He said he couldn't show me the footage because it would cost him his job, but he could tell me that what had happened in that room went way beyond typical bachelorette party behavior. He described activities that made me feel physically sick and confirmed that Sarah had been a willing and active participant. When I got home that night, Sarah was in an unusually good mood. She'd made my favorite dinner and had opened a bottle of wine. She kept talking about how excited she was for our wedding and how much she loved me. But now her words felt hollow and manipulative. During dinner, she brought up the bachelorette party again and started telling me this elaborate story about how they'd all felt sick from the dinner and had to leave the club early. She said they'd ended up back at Jessica's apartment watching movies and eating ice cream. Every word she spoke was a lie, and she was looking me directly in the eyes while she said it. I realized that not only had she betrayed me physically, but she was continuing to betray me by lying about it and making me question my own perception of reality. That night, while she was sleeping, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, there was a video file attached. The message said it was from someone who'd been at Platinum on Saturday night and thought I should know what my fiancé had been doing. I stepped outside to watch the video, and what I saw confirmed everything Jake's security friend had told me. It was clear footage of Sarah in the VIP area, and there was no question about what was happening or that she was completely conscious and willing. I saved the video to my phone and deleted the original message. Now I had undeniable proof of her betrayal, but I still didn't know how to confront her about it. The next few days were torture. I kept going through the motions of wedding planning while knowing that everything was built on lies. Sarah's family was calling about final details, my parents were asking about the rehearsal dinner, and vendors were confirming deliveries. Meanwhile, I had video evidence that my fiancé had cheated on me a week before our wedding. I couldn't eat or sleep properly. Sarah kept asking if I was feeling okay, and I had to pretend it was just pre-wedding nerves. Every time she touched me or said she loved me, I felt like I was going to be sick. On Saturday morning, I called my brother Tom and asked if I could come over to talk. Tom lived about an hour away, so it would give me some space to figure out what to do next. I told Sarah I was going to help Tom with some yard work, which wasn't technically a lie since he always had projects going on. When I got to Tom's house, I broke down and told him everything. I showed him the screenshots from the group chat and the video that had been sent to me. Tom listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he told me that he was sorry this had happened, but I needed to confront Sarah before the wedding. He said I couldn't marry someone who had not only cheated on me, but was actively lying about it and manipulating me. He offered to be there for support when I talked to her. While we were discussing how to handle the situation, my phone rang. It was my mom, calling about some last-minute wedding detail. I couldn't bring myself to answer it because I knew I'd probably break down and tell her what was happening. Tom suggested that I needed more support than just him and recommended that I reach out to Sarah's brother Mark. Tom had always gotten along well with Mark, and he thought Mark would want to know what his sister had done before the families gathered for the wedding. I was hesitant to involve Sarah's family, but Tom pointed out that if I called off the wedding without explanation, it would create even more drama and hurt feelings. He said Mark deserved to know why his sister's engagement was ending, especially since he was supposed to be walking her down the aisle. That evening, I called Mark and asked if he could meet me for coffee the next day. I told him I needed to discuss something important about Sarah and the wedding. Mark sounded concerned and agreed to meet me at a place near his apartment. Sunday morning, I showed Mark the evidence I collected. His reaction was even stronger than Tom's had been. He was angry and disappointed, and said this behavior was completely unlike the sister he thought he knew. Mark told me that Sarah had always been the responsible one in their family, and he couldn't believe she would jeopardize her relationship like this. Mark offered to talk to Sarah himself, but I told him I needed to be the one to confront her. However, I asked if he would be willing to be present during the conversation, since I was worried she might try to gaslight me or deny everything even when faced with proof. We agreed that Mark would come to our apartment that evening, and I would show Sarah the evidence with him there as a witness. Mark said he would support whatever decision I made about the wedding, but he thought I was absolutely right to call it off. Having both Tom and Mark on my side gave me the strength I needed to finally confront Sarah about her betrayal. I spent the rest of Sunday preparing for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I texted Sarah that afternoon and told her I was bringing Mark over for dinner so we could all hang out before the wedding craziness got too intense. She seemed happy about the idea and said she'd pick up some takeout from our favorite restaurant. When Mark and I arrived at the apartment, Sarah was in a great mood. She hugged both of us and started chattering about how excited she was that our families were getting along so well. She had set the table nicely and opened a bottle of wine, like she was hosting a celebration. We made small talk during dinner, but I could barely eat anything. Sarah kept talking about wedding details and asking Mark if he was ready for his speech at the reception. Mark was being polite, but I could tell he was struggling with what he knew about his sister's behavior. After we finished eating, I told Sarah we needed to talk about something serious. The change in her expression was immediate. She asked what was wrong, and I could see her starting to get defensive before I'd even said anything. I started by telling her that I knew she had lied to me about what happened at her bachelorette party. Sarah immediately denied it and said she'd told me everything that had happened. She looked at Mark like she expected him to back her up, but he just sat there with a serious expression. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots from the group chat where she and her friends had coordinated their lies. Sarah's face went white as she read through the messages. She tried to grab my phone, but I pulled it back and told her there was more. That's when I showed her the video. Sarah watched it for about 5 seconds before she started crying and saying it wasn't what it looked like. She claimed she had been too drunk to know what was happening and that her friends had pressured her into going to the VIP area. But the video clearly showed her making conscious decisions and actively participating in everything that happened. When I pointed this out, She changed her story and said she had been thinking about calling off our wedding anyway, because she wasn't sure she was ready for marriage. Mark finally spoke up and told his sister that he was disappointed in her choices and her dishonesty. He said that lying to me about what had happened was just as bad as the original betrayal, and that I deserved better treatment from someone who claimed to love me. Sarah turned on Mark and accused him of taking my side against his own family. She said he didn't understand what it was like to be a woman facing the pressure of marriage, and that she had just made one mistake. I told her that cheating on me wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of choices she had made throughout that entire night. I explained that I had recorded our conversation on my phone, so there would be no question later about what had been said or admitted to. When Sarah realized I was recording, she became furious and demanded that I delete it. She said I had no right to record her without permission and threatened to call the police. Mark told her that she was in no position to be making threats given what she had done. The conversation ended with Sarah storming into our bedroom and slamming the door. Mark and I sat in the living room for a while, both of us emotionally drained from the confrontation. He apologized for his sister's behavior and told me I was making the right decision by calling off the wedding. The next morning, Sarah acted like our conversation had never happened. She was getting ready for work and talking about picking up her dress for the final fitting. When I reminded her that we needed to cancel the wedding, she said I was overreacting and that we could work through this problem. I told her there was nothing to work through. The wedding was off, and I would be moving out of our apartment as soon as I could find somewhere else to stay. Sarah started crying and begging me to reconsider, saying she would do anything to fix our relationship. But I was done. I had lost all trust in her, and I couldn't imagine ever believing anything she said again. I started calling vendors to cancel services, and Sarah kept following me around the apartment, trying to convince me to change my mind. The hardest calls were to our families. My parents were shocked and disappointed, but they supported my decision when I explained what had happened. Sarah's parents were more difficult to deal with. Her mother accused me of being unreasonable and said that everyone makes mistakes before their wedding. When I told Sarah's mother about the video evidence, she became quiet and asked to see it. After watching just a few seconds, she hung up the phone without saying anything else. Throughout the day, Sarah's friends kept calling and texting me. Jessica left a voicemail saying that I was ruining Sarah's life over nothing, and that what happened at the Bachelorette party was just harmless fun. Amanda sent me a long text message claiming that I was being controlling and that Sarah deserved better than someone who would spy on her. But the most telling reaction came from Brittany. The friend I hadn't even known was at the party. She called me directly and apologized for what had happened. She said she had tried to talk Sarah out of going to the VIP area, but Sarah had insisted it was just for fun and wouldn't affect our relationship. Brittany also told me that this wasn't the first time Sarah had acted inappropriately when she was drinking with her friends. She said there had been other incidents during girls' nights out that the group had agreed to keep secret from me. By the end of the week, word had spread through our entire social circle about the canceled wedding. Some people were supportive of my decision, while others thought I was being too harsh. A few mutual friends tried to mediate and convince me to give Sarah another chance. The wedding venue was understanding about the cancellation, though we lost our deposit. Most of the vendors were able to cancel without penalty since we gave them a week's notice. The hardest part was dealing with out-of-town guests who had already made travel arrangements. Sarah moved back in with her parents temporarily. She sent me several long text messages apologizing and asking for forgiveness, but I didn't respond to any of them. I had said everything I needed to say during our confrontation, and the recorded conversation proved that she had admitted to everything. 2 weeks after what should have been our wedding day, I ran into Jessica at a grocery store. She approached me and said that Sarah was devastated and had been crying constantly since I'd left. She asked if there was any way I would consider couples counseling or giving Sarah a second chance. I told Jessica that trust was the foundation of any relationship, and Sarah had destroyed that foundation completely. I also mentioned that I knew about the other incidents Brittany had told me about, which made Jessica's face go pale. She quickly ended the conversation and walked away without saying goodbye. Moving out of the apartment Sarah and I had shared was emotionally brutal. Every item I packed reminded me of some plan we'd made together or some future we'd imagined. The hardest things to deal with were the wedding gifts that had already arrived and the photos of us together that were scattered throughout our home. I ended up staying with Tom for a few weeks while I looked for my own place. Having my brother's support was crucial during those first difficult days. He let me process my emotions without judgment and helped me start thinking about rebuilding my life. The financial impact of canceling the wedding was significant. We lost deposits on several vendors, and I had to pay cancellation fees for the honeymoon trip we'd booked. Sarah offered to split these costs, but I decided it was easier to just handle everything myself rather than have ongoing financial ties to her. Work became my refuge during this time. Focusing on spreadsheets and client accounts gave me something concrete to concentrate on when my emotions felt too overwhelming. My coworkers were supportive but respectful of my privacy, which I appreciated. About a month after the breakup, I started seeing a therapist to help me process what had happened. I was struggling with feelings of betrayal, but also with self-doubt about whether I had made the right decision. The therapist helped me understand that my reaction was completely normal and that I had every right to end a relationship where trust had been broken so completely. One thing that surprised me was how angry I felt, not just about the cheating, but about the elaborate lies and manipulation that had followed. Sarah hadn't just made a mistake in a moment of weakness. She had constructed an entire false narrative and convinced her friends to support it. That level of deception felt almost worse than the original betrayal. I also had to deal with the social fallout from our breakup. Some mutual friends took sides, and several relationships in our friend group became strained or ended completely. A few people who had initially supported me later changed their minds after hearing Sarah's version of events. The hardest part was the loneliness. Sarah and I had been together for 4 years, and she had been my primary companion for everything from grocery shopping to major life decisions. Learning to be alone again at 29 felt like starting over in ways I hadn't expected. But there were also unexpected positives. I rediscovered interests and friendships that I had neglected during our relationship. I started going to the gym regularly, took up hiking, and reconnected with college friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, I began to remember who I was as an individual rather than as half of a couple. 3 months after the breakup, Sarah reached out one final time through Mark. She wanted to meet for coffee to apologize and get closure. Mark thought it might be good for both of us, but I decided I wasn't ready for that conversation and might never be. 6 months later, I moved into my own apartment across town. It was smaller than the place Sarah and I had shared, but it felt like a fresh start. I decorated it according to my own tastes for the first time in years, and having that personal space helped me feel more like myself again. I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had started dating someone new, which initially bothered me more than I expected. But my therapist helped me understand that my reaction was about feeling replaced rather than missing Sarah herself. By that point, I was genuinely glad she had moved on because it meant she was less likely to try contacting me again. Work had given me a promotion, partly because I was putting in longer hours and taking on additional responsibilities. Having professional success helped rebuild my confidence and reminded me that I had value beyond my relationship status. My colleagues had become more like friends, and I was developing a social life that didn't revolve around couple activities. I started dating again after about 8 months, though I was very cautious about trusting people. The first few relationships were casual and didn't last long, partly because I was still processing what had happened with Sarah. I was upfront with women I dated about my recent breakup and my trust issues, which some appreciated and others found too heavy. One thing that surprised me was how the experience had changed my perspective on relationships in general. I became much more observant of how people behaved when they thought no one was watching, and I paid closer attention to consistency between words and actions. Some friends said I had become too cynical, but I felt like I was just being more realistic. A year after the breakup, I ran into Amanda at a coffee shop. She approached me hesitantly and asked if we could talk. She apologized for her behavior during the aftermath of Sarah's Bachelorette party and admitted that she had known what Sarah was doing was wrong. She said the friend group had pressured her to stay loyal to Sarah, but she had regretted not speaking up. Amanda also told me that Sarah had cheated on her new boyfriend with someone from work, and that several of their mutual friends had distanced themselves from her because of a pattern of dishonest behavior. While I didn't take any satisfaction in hearing this, it confirmed that my decision to end our relationship had been the right one. The conversation with Amanda gave me a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. It validated my perception of what had happened and helped me feel less like I had overreacted to the situation. Epilogue. It's been 2 years now since everything happened, and I can honestly say I'm in a much better place. I'm dating someone new, Rachel, who I met through a hiking group. She's patient with my trust issues and understands why I need transparency in relationships. We've been together for 6 months, and things are progressing naturally without the pressure I felt with Sarah. I still think about that night at Platinum sometimes, but it doesn't make me angry anymore. Instead, I feel grateful that I discovered Sarah's true character before we got married and had children together. The pain of ending an engagement was nothing compared to what a divorce would have been. My relationship with trust has evolved too. I'm not as naive as I was before, but I've learned there's a difference between being cautious and being paranoid. Rachel has helped me understand that not everyone will betray me the way Sarah did, and that healing means being willing to be vulnerable again when the right person comes along. The whole experience taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Walking away from a 4-year relationship and a planned wedding took courage I didn't know I possessed. I'm proud of myself for choosing self-respect over the comfort of staying in a familiar but dishonest relationship.